All right, everybody. Now that we've got a handle on what's going on with all these crazy 5/7 chords, we've looked at them in root position, we've looked at them in the inversions. We got our new, figured bass inversion symbols. We know what a 4/2 chord is. That's kind of crazy. It's time to sort of spread some love around and talk about adding sevenths to not the 5 chord. So let's go ahead and get that going. All right. So broadly speaking, we sort of can extend the 7th chord party into the wider world in a topic that sometimes gets called non-dominant sevenths, meaning like 7th chords that are not a dominant 7th chord. Really, we just mean we're just sort of moving it outwards. What we're going to find is that this is, not quite as common as having the 7th on the 5/7 chord, but still pretty widely used. And there are some that are, of course, more common than others, as we've seen with all of our harmonic ideas. And the two that following the 5/7 chord are by far the most commonly used as 7th chords are the 2 chord and the 7 chord. And this is both in major keys and minor keys. And so it shouldn't be surprising that if we sort of think about on the progression chart, where the bulk of the functional harmonic activity happens is in the predominant and the dominant areas. And that's what we're seeing here with the incorporation of sevenths, because we've seen that adding the 7th to the chord deepens its functional purpose. And these are the chords that have a real strong functional role. And so it's not surprising that this is where we find our 7th chord activity. What we're going to find is that the part writing is a little bit more specific in these instances, because you will recall with the 5/7 chord, we had these 2 tendency tones to contend with, the leading tone and the 7th. Well, we're going to find that that sort of changes a little bit depending on the context. The 2 chord, for instance, doesn't contain the leading tone. And the 7 chord is a little funky because it sometimes is half diminished, it sometimes is fully diminished. And so the only thing that we know for sure is that the 7th is still going to resolve downwards. And so there's a little bit of just a little bit of funkiness with this. But let's dive in and let's start by talking about the 2/7 chord. 2/7. So the 2/7 in major keys is going to be a minor 7th chord. And in minor keys, it's going to be a half diminished 7. So we're starting to sort of get our half diminished 7th chord fun here. But the sort of beauty is that since it's not on a 7 chord, again, it's not going to have that leading tone that we don't need to worry about that. The 2 chord, when it has a 7th on it, is still going to be a predominant chord, so it still wants to lead to 5. And it's not uncommon for any inversion of 2 to be either a triad, a 7th chord, or to go to any inversion of 5 in, a 7th chord, a triad, anything. So the 2 chord and the 5 chord have such a strong functional relationship that any inversion, any combination of triad, 7th chord, it's all pretty kosher there. This is extremely common, and so there's a real importance placed on sort of knowing this, because it could happen a lot. And as I mentioned, the big, I think, sort of marquee technique with the 7th added to the 2 chord is that unlike 5, there is no leading tone. So our voice leading is somewhat more free. You can see I've coined the term freer. Three E's in a row, what could be more fun than that? So since there's no leading tone, we're a little bit more open-ended with how we can use the 2/7 chord here. But again, it's going to be going to 5. So let's take a look at what we can expect. So this would be sort of just the foundational way in a couple inversions that we would expect to see this happen. We're going to be in the key of F. And we look at the first one, we can see that we've got a root position 2/7 chord, which is G, B flat, D, F, root, 3rd, 5th, 7th. And that's just going to a nice root position triad 5. And as always, if we look at this, the 7th of this chord, which the sopranos are singing, is still going to resolve downwards. And if we go to any of these inversions, the next one's the 2/6/5, the 7th still resolves downwards to 5, or to the 3rd of the 5 chord. Even in something crazy like a 2/6/5 or a 2/4/3, 2/4/3, this third example, going to a root position 5/7 chord, the 7th resolves downwards. Keen listeners amongst you will know that this chord progression, G7 going to a C7 chord, G minor 7, I should say, going to C7, is commonly used all over the Pink Floyd record, Dark Side of the Moon. And this exact progression is sort of what makes up most of the Great Gig in the Sky. So if you're sort of having some weird thoughts and you can't quite place where you're recognizing this from, it's Dark Side of the Moon. So the 7th is going to resolve downwards because that's what 7ths do. So nothing changes there at all. But again, as we mentioned, the big change is that the leading tone doesn't necessarily need to resolve upwards, right? So if we look in this first example here in root position, the alto voice has the 3rd, root 3rd, 5th, 7th. And we would expect the 3rd, which is typically in a 5/7 chord, the leading tone, we would expect that to move upwards, but it doesn't have to because there's no tonal pull of B flat up anywhere in the key of F, right? If we're in the key of F, in many ways, the 4th scale degree kind of feels like it almost wants to resolve downwards. And so if we're singing this note, it sounds good to go downwards to the 5th of 5. Look at the last example here, our 2/4/3 moving to 5/7. In this instance, again, the 3rd of this chord is definitely not going to go upwards. It's going to take advantage of the fact that it's now a common tone. And that B flat can just stick around and become the 7th of 5/7. Right? So this freedom of not needing to resolve multiple notes in very specific directions can actually open up many cool opportunities in moving from a 7th chord on 2 to 5. In the middle example here, 2/6/5 to 5, we are still going to see the 3rd go upwards. So it's not that it can't, but here it wants to go upwards because it's Fa in the bass going to Sol, the root of 5, and then probably to 1. Right, so as long as we resolve the 7th downwards, we're in pretty good shape here. And you can see all of these examples are moving to a root position 5 chord. That's by far the most likely outcome of any 2 chord, whether it's a 2/7, 2/6/5, 2/4/3, very likely that it's going to end up at a root position 5 or 5/7 chord. But let's look at some noteworthy things associated with the 2/7 chord here. Couple more examples here. You can see that we're certainly not moving only to root position 5 chords in this. So let's sort of again say that because the 3rd isn't the leading tone and doesn't need to resolve upwards, we can really take it to some pretty cool places. So if we look at this first example here, 2/6/5, right? So the altos have the root, the bass has the 3rd, the tenors have the 5th, and again, the sopranos have the 7th, which is going to resolve downwards. Look what the basses do with the 3rd, though. They're going to keep it as a common tone to make a 5/4/2 chord with the 7th in the bass, that common tone. I just love it. You know, we talked about when we added a 7th to the 5-7 chord, and we said that there, you know, we've got now 4 out of the 7 notes of this key in this one chord, which is kind of amazing. And we've seen that there's a lot of common tone stuff that comes out of that. Well, now we've got the 2-6-5 chord or 2-7 chord, which also has 4 out of 7 notes. So there's a lot of common tones. Our part writing can become so smooth. The altos staying on G, and the basses here staying on B flat. So it's really just the sopranos and the tenors moving, and each by step, these two chords are so close together. It's really lovely. In this second example, we're taking a peek at everybody's favorite, the 4-2 chord option here. So a 2-4-2, G is the root in the tenors, B flat in the altos is the 3rd, sopranos have the 5th, and the basses have the 7th, which is really awesome in this instance because we are in the key of F. And the 7th of this 2 chord is Do, right? So this is a Re, Fa, La, Do. So we've got this chord which has Do in the bass, which we would expect to be the most stable note of all in the key of F, but we're harmonizing it with a very unstable sound. And we can see that in this case it's gonna again take us to a 5-6-5 chord with Do, T. So we got this awesome chord, the 2-4-2 with Do in the bass. And what we'll often see is the 1 chord starting us out, moving to a 2-4-2, right? Right? Because you can just keep Do in the bass and then maybe move to some kind of 5-6-5. Really, really, really cool. So, and remember, whenever we have those 4-2 chords, since the 7th is in the bass, it's going to resolve downwards, and we're always going to go to a first inversion chord. All right, let's look at one last example here, which is a root position 2-7. Root in the bass, 3rd in the alto, 5th in the tenor, and 7th in the soprano, going into a cadential 6-4. So here's 2-7, cadential 6-4, to a triad, and we'd probably go to 1. And what we find is that the 7th in the soprano here is going to resolve downwards because that's what 7ths do. But because we're going through the cadential 6-4, the resolution happens through the cadential 6-4. So the 7th doesn't resolve down immediately. It resolves downwards eventually through the cadential 6-4. So that's just a few examples of kind of what we're looking for here, looking at in these 2-7 chords. All inversions are possible. We just want to make sure that 7th resolves downwards, and we're going to go to pretty much some type of 5 chord, and it's a really, really wonderful color, especially when we get to involve either the 2-4-2 or the 5-4-2. There's some real magic in there.